can offer in advocating for more inclusive peace and security discussions, and particularly for women, the persecuted and marginalized groups. So feminist theories understand security as a multidimensional concept, and this means that human security should be understood beyond the physical and the psychological, to include also structural and ecological aspects. Also, it should not be restrained to a dichotomy, oh my God, between conflict and peace. So access to food, shelter, education, health, environmental stability, etc., should be included in conceptualization of insecurity or security. And as such, broaden the women, peace and security agenda internationally and nationally. So my name is Liv Tonnesen, and I am researcher at CMI and also the co-director of Law Transform. And with me here today, I have a wonderful panel with me, Marianne Tørresen, the postdoctoral researcher at CMI, and you have seen talking about women on the bench. Samar Khalafallah, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Bayreuth, and just introduced us a bit to her wonderful PhD project. Torun Wimpelmann, research director at CMI, and Egna Sidumo and Carmelisa Rosario, both working on Mozambique, doctoral researcher and postdoctoral researcher also at CMI. So welcome, all of you. So I thought we would start in Sudan. And I'm sorry for being so stuttering after watching the documentary. It's the first time I saw it. I was wondering, Sama, if you could sort of say a little bit more about sort of the insecurities that feminists in Sudan are facing and how sort of the feminist scene in Sudan is looking like right now, as the country has been through enormous changes, political changes.
Okay, thank you, Lee. I'm putting so many hats, really very experience. I'm taking off now the hat of the PhD student and the hat of a queer activist, and putting back the hat of a feminist student. So the rise of feminism in Sudan, much like in other parts of Africa, gained notable momentum in the late 1990s. However, the roots of organized women movements can be traced back to the earliest, with the establishment of Sudanese Women Union in 1952. While the union marked an early effort to champion women's rights and demands, over the years, it faced criticisms. Recently, many feminists felt that it didn't thoroughly combat their perspectives, largely because it adopted a conservative stance in its demands. This conservative approach was influenced by a desire to maintain the social privileges. So the documentary of Matluga offers a raw picture of the challenges faced by Sudanese feminists. In Sudan, the concept of self-identifying as a feminist is similar to the global LGBT concept of coming out. So from my personal experience, when the first time I identified myself as a feminist, my brother's immediate reaction was, "Inti kafra?" A term that translates to, "Are you an unbeliever? Are you an infidel?" So this immediate association showcases the depth of negative stereotypes and misconceptions that the Sudanese feminists have to combat. In the eyes of many, identifying as a feminist equates to being labeled as a man-hater, an unbeliever, smoker, or even a lesbian. Such a stigmatization has led many to shy away from publicly identifying as a feminist. And in response to these challenges, many have resorted to adopting the term of womanists instead of feminists, finding it more tolerable to the broader society. So, however, the recent revolution in Sudan presented a new era of hope, unity, and promise for a more inclusive international feminist movement, intersectional feminist movement. So During and after the revolution, we saw some coalitions and establishment of new feminist groups that are publicly announced as feminist queer groups. And unfortunately, these groups have faced significant resistance, both from within the feminist movement itself and the larger society. So contemporary feminism in Sudan appears divided. On one end, there are the senior, what I call senior feminist camp, a distinction not just drawn by age, but also by social class, control over resources, conservatism, and privilege. On the other hand, we have the young camp, compromises of brave, outspoken feminists, challenging societal taboos such as sexual violence. This division has resulted in what I term as a problem conclusion, leading to disagreements on what should be prioritized within the feminist movement. Often, the senior feminists utilize power dynamics, asserting that certain issues are not the priority for now, effectively silencing the younger generation. So an example of this is Sudan. Sudan remains among the 6 countries that have not ratified CEDAW. So post-revolution, the demand for its ratification grew louder, only to be met with intense societal backlash and hate speech against feminists. After the coup, the situation got worse. There were reports of feminists being assaulted by male protesters during sit-ins. While being a feminist is not criminalized in Sudan, both the state and the broader society have adopted ways to resist and repress the movement, blaming feminists for social ills. Yet the core feminists are first and foremost women, deeply embedded within the fabric of Sudanese society. The right for equality and rights cannot be isolated, and the rights cannot be isolated from the larger challenges Sudanese women face, be it gender-based violence in domestic and public spaces, political marginalization, or exclusion from the decision-making process. In the recent war, feminists face challenges on so many levels. While already navigating societal resistance, they are now unfairly blamed for the conflict itself. This blame is a deflection tactic meant to silence their advocacy. Yet beyond their roles as activists, these feminists are also ordinary citizens directly affected by the horrors of war. It's unrealistic and unfair to expect them to shoulder the dual burden of activism and survival simultaneously. How many minutes I have? Okay, thank you. So I just want to talk a little bit about the positives. So the narrative of women and their roles in society has been undergoing a significant transformation, of course, related to the political transformation that have taken place. So one of the most evident shifts that can be seen in the deepening bond of sisterhood and solidarity among Sudanese women in general and feminists in specific. And beyond the romanticization of the idea or the notion of sisterhood, and as we said in the documentary, we cannot survive without our friends. Feminists in Sudan found ways to translate the notion of sisterhood into actions, adopting concept of women for women, and nisa lil nisa. So campaigns like We Only Believe in Survivors open so many spaces for the survivors and the victims of sexual harassment to open up and to talk and to share their stories, which before was a taboo. Another thing I should mention, because I personally admire it, is Ga'adat al-Jaban, or the coffee gatherings. So the coffee gatherings, have been essential spaces for women in closed settings. And within even my family, where we gathered all the women of the family, the age difference is like from 8 years old to 55 years old, when we talk and share about the experiences throughout the week. I remember growing up, I couldn't have such a space. I couldn't have like the place to share my experiences with sexual harassment I face in the streets. So providing this space with a respect to the experiences I believe it was the start for more and bonding and sisterhood. And also one thing that I need to mention is the feminist marches that were like pre-feminist marches after the revolution. It added another dimension to the women's movement, organized primarily by younger feminists. These marches challenge societal norms by staking a claim in public spaces, traditionally dominated by men. And I also must emphasize on the importance of the regional connection in networks. So the Pan-African and Pan-Arabic unity amplifies the call for women's rights, while also reflecting the diverse issues faced across different countries. I will end with a quote from Ri Harbi, beginning of quote. Having feminist friends changed my life. I became more open, educated, and liberated. The best friendships I have ever had. They are my safe space. They are so intellectual and emotionally intelligent that it makes me a better person. It's a sisterhood of freedom and power in the world. So here I'm just throwing so much of my work and my talk on the theory by Audre Lorde, the erotic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I would like to move to Turin and Afghanistan. And Afghanistan is also a very complex case with many layers if we are talking about a feminist take on insecurity, especially given the background of how NATO invaded the country in a way sort of to help the poor Afghan women. I guess my question to you, Turin, is it possible to stake out the feminist position without it being sort of entangled with imperialism?
Thank you, Dave. Thank you for the invitation. And I feel like whatever I'm going to say now might be very dry compared to how fulfilled and how much it counts. It's obviously very complicated for various reasons now in Afghanistan. I think it's been quite unfortunate that the feminism has been co-opted or appropriated by imperialist warfare in Afghanistan. We all remember the invocation of saving Afghan women after the US-led invasion in 2001. And that has meant that advocating for Afghan women's rights have often been equated by support to war. So how to kind of now take this forward in a situation that is, of course, extremely difficult and unprecedented, I would say, in today's world in terms of restrictions placed on women. I think that firstly, we kind of need to allow for complexity and nuance when assessing the last 20 years. I think because the left has come to see the invasion of after 9/11 and the consequent warfare as an imperialist undertaking. There has been a tendency to equate women's rights activism with a colonial or imperialist impression, and also to see it as a somehow foreign project in Afghanistan. And then there is, of course, a kind of tradition of knowledge production in Afghanistan that is also, again, rooted in colonialism that sees Afghanistan as somehow kind of uniquely cultural, rural and tribal, and which in turn then means that women's rights is a kind of urban elite phenomenon, not at all kind of alien to the country. So, so we get this kind of, what we end up with then is a kind of assumption that Taliban rule is not all that consequential because the oppression that they're currently conducting is not all that different from how Afghan women would live their life anyway, that they would be at home and not meeting men outside their family and so on. So I think we need to look back at the last 20 years, and we can acknowledge that saving Afghan women, that invocation was extremely problematic and cynical. We can also acknowledge that all of the kind of foreign-faded gender interventions and programs might be kind of paternalistic. They might have been short-sighted and based on superficial analysis. And they did fuel, as the rest of the international presence did, corruption, did fuel an angiosation of women's movement, and it certainly also fueled the conservative backlash. And it was so easy for conservative forces to label feminism or women's rights as a kind of, as Anna said, unbelievers and foreigners. So we can acknowledge all that, but I think we at the same time need to acknowledge that there was broad social change in the last 20 years. There was a whole generation of women who were educated, who had mobility that had not been common in their family. Walking on the streets, being in cafes became less controversial, at least in the large cities. So we need to acknowledge that. At the same time, that we acknowledge that the framing of saving Afghan women is very problematic. And then I think that, in Afghanistan, perhaps more than other cases, we cannot, and we have to acknowledge that change can be messy and tainted by compromises. And I think with Srila Roy, who said that we mustn't kind of hold women's rights activism hostage to this kind of ideal of pureness, that, it can only be achieved when it's, politically untainted by problematic alliances, when it's rooted in a kind of the overall democratic vision. That should be the ideal, but, not always can we achieve that. We mustn't dismiss change that doesn't happen according to that ideal. So, and now I think we have a new form of imperialism, which is to kind of say that this oppression is not a massive break with Afghan tradition, and also to delegitimize the Afghan women's movement. As Anna also said, all women's movement are extremely heterogeneous. There is difference about political strategy, about priorities, and that's certainly been the case for Afghan women's movement, and they don't agree on a lot of things, but that doesn't mean they're illegitimate. But that's what a lot of internationals now paint them as. So yeah, it's a messy way, and it's obviously, I'm, as an outsider, I'm not fully in position to answer this question, but there's a little. Thank you.
I think we'll move to Haiti, partly because Marianne has to go exactly at 3 o'clock. I want to make sure that at least she will get to present before she has to run to the airport. But so the Women, Peace and Security agenda internationally has, many would say and critique it for having like a hyper focus on sexual violence, going from Resolution 1325 and all the following resolutions. And sexual violence has been really prominent on the agenda in Haiti, although Haiti is not a case that has undergone any civil war. There was an earthquake, and in the wake of that, sexual violence has really emerged on the agenda. And so I was wondering if you could say a bit about that, and also referring back to Torun's take on Afghanistan, to what extent sort of local Haitian women's groups are sort of have ownership to that agenda.
Yeah, so this earthquake happened back in 2010. It was a very devastating earthquake. It was all over the news, and finally Haiti became like the center of the world's attention. I don't know how much you know about it. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but between 200,000 and 300,000 people were killed. Over 1 million were left homeless. So they were set up a lot of these internally displaced person camps, IDP camps. And inside these camps, there were an observed increase in sexual and gender-based violence, particularly rape. This was partly because these camps were like overcrowded and they lacked safe accommodation and sanitary facilities for women and girls. Poor lighting, not a lot of police to patrol at night, and reports also show that girls had to trade sex to secure food and refuge. And these incidences of sexual violence in these IDP camps, which the NGO community, which were very much present in Haiti at the time, referred to as an epidemic of rape, was pretty much the only gender-based area that got any attention in the post-earthquake reconstruction of the country. And on one side, the increased attention to sexual violence was positive because it was quite new in the history of Haiti that rape had been seen as a criminal offense. It was only criminalized in 2005. So this increased international focus on sexual violence in a way helped, raise awareness about the problem. And there were some reports of increased reports, and like rape found its way to the court's dockets in increasing numbers. So there was like a good side to it. But in the aftermath, Haitian feminists have criticized the international approach to sexual and focus on sexual violence for several reasons. I can say a little bit about the Haitian feminist movement. It's an old movement. It grew out of the American occupation of the country in the beginning of the 1900s. And whenever there's been like political change and the democratization movement, all of that, the Haitian feminist movement have played a very important role in this. Yeah, but the feminist movement criticized these international donors, first of all, for framing the problem as a rape epidemic. It depicts Haitian men as sexual predators and Haitian women as prey. And it also contributed to the depoliticization of the concept of sexual and gender-based violence in the Haitian context. Because sexual violence is far from not a new phenomenon at all in Haiti. It's not something that all of a sudden emerged in these camps. It had been used politically and strategically to demobilize the women's movement and popular movements in general throughout Haiti's modern history. And it was first used by American soldiers during the occupation, which is why it kind of sparked the feminist movement in the first place, and also against political opponents during the dictatorship and also during the military regime. And it's also used today by gangs who are taking over most parts of the capital as a way of spreading fear and punishing neighborhoods that support rivaling gangs. And to make people acknowledge rape as a part of a bigger structural problem and also a political thing was one of the key aims of the Haitian feminist movement. So they kind of felt like this outside perspective on rape as something as an epidemic kind of legitimize their efforts, as is also the case in these other cases. And second, Haitian feminists, or rather than building on the in-depth knowledge of the Haitian feminists, in the aftermath of the earthquake, NGOs were accused of sidelining and even denouncing the movement in the reconstruction of the country. And a telling example is how no civil society groups and no women's rights groups was included in the work on the post-disaster needs assessment, which was basically a plan on how to get Haiti back on track and how to reconstruct the country. It was just a gathering of the Haitian government and international NGOs led by the World Bank. So no one thought it would be a good idea to include civil society and the Haitian feminist movement in this work. And as a result, the gender dimension was almost absent in the plan for the reconstruction of the country, and maybe that's partly why there has been very little positive development in the women's cause in Haiti. They had this opportunity to really, start anew, but it was, wasted. And also under the pretext of urgency after this catastrophe and the need to spend donor money quickly, these traditional women's Haitian feminist organizations were sidelined, and instead one favored the women's organization that had been created after the earthquake. So yeah, as mentioned, this is kind of a missed opportunity to acknowledge and build on the long-term work of Haitian feminist voices, which might have also helped taken a more holistic approach to the women's cause, because sexual violence is not just about reactive measures; it's also about preventive, and so that was kind of the missed opportunity there.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, now we are moving to our CMI's dream team on Mozambique. I will start with Egna, and I was wondering if you could perhaps say a little bit about the sort of ongoing conflict in northern Mozambique, which often is termed as some sort of violent extremism, or yeah, and also especially address, sort of what are women's human rights and women's human security needs in that area, and what is currently done politically and practically to support them. And now go to Sala.
Thank you, and I hope you can understand my lost English, still lost English. I hope I can speak in Portuguese, and I don't know how much you know about Mozambique, but Mozambique has, actually we have a cycle of violence since the 16th. The most important cycle of violence ended in the 90s with peace agreements in 1994. And then we had like 20 years of peace, at least. And in this meantime, a lot of feminist groups emerged, a lot of civil society organizations interested in women's rights emerged. And 2012, a new cycle of violence resurged with the government and the same rebel groups that signed the peace agreements in the 90s. And then 5 years ago, a new cycle of violence started. The new is the violent extremism in the northern Cabo Delgado. And this new cycle of violence emerged in the context of the peace agreements to try to end the first one who emerged in the 12th. So it was very confused for the context for the Mozambicans. And the first years, the government doesn't accept the idea that we had a new conflict because it was very concentrated in the first conflict. And this led to massive violations of women's and girls, but without any kind of reports. So after the signature of the peace agreements in 2019, the government and I think all the civil society organizations and even the international organizations start to pay more attention to Cabo Delgado situation. So when the government and civil society and the international organizations start to pay more attention to Cabo Delgado, some reports start to emerge about the violence of the kind of violence that is going on in Cabo Delgado against women, against children, recruitment of children to be indoctrinated to join rebel groups, violence of women as a way of war, as part of the war of the rebel groups. But not only the rebel group was violating women's rights, but even the government. And I think the most known case was the killing of women by the security forces and accused to be witchcraft and to be linked with the rebel groups. So what we have now is more reports on the massive violations of women in the Cabo Delgado situations. We are trying, Mozambique now, but the international donors are trying to build a strategy not only to reduce the number of violations, sorry, but to build to a new plan on women, peace and security. We had a human plan before, not before the attacks, because the attacks started in 2017, and the plan was built, or at least was approved in 2018. So no one has the idea about what was going on about that related with violations. So now human unions and all the international donors are trying to work on and track the violations and try to build a new national plan on human peace and security, and the national plan, at least in prevention of violence, to try to track the violations and try to see how they can maybe face this kind of violence in the
national plans, are they sort of narrowly focusing in on women's physical safety? How are they addressing other human security needs? In a sense, I know that this area is quite marginalized and in terms of other, you know, in terms of poverty, other aspects of human security.
Well, a base is there is start still going in Cabo Delgado to try to see not only the physical security of the women, but the needs related with economic and social needs, especially because the majority of women are displaced now. So we have at least almost 1 million of displaced persons. So people are trying to track this kind of needs, not only related with violation, of course, but related with the needs, especially economic and social needs, to try to see if it's possible to include in the new national plan.
So how is this in the country, and how, in a way, does feminist mobilization look like from your perspective?
Well, it ties more than people actually talk about. So Cabo Delgado has now been it has almost been taken out of the context of the rest of the country. And Agna was very good as just tracing back how there is a cycle of violence that has been happening in Mozambique ever since, well, before independence, of course, because there was a liberation war, but after independence as well for 16 years, as she said. We had the civil war, and then a new cycle 20 years after, and very close this one. And this is sort of tied into the relationship between citizens and the state, and as our project implies, grievances that have been going on. And there has been this discussion between whether this is a religion motivated war, which definitely there is a religious element to it, but there is also an economic, a structural, and a governance element. The area is an area that has a lot of extractive industries working on it, and the specific area where this conflict is happening is where some of the biggest gas gas deposits in the world exist. So there are a lot of interests international and local interests that kind of play into this possession and that can sort of fuel underlying conflicts. Now, one thing that Agna didn't mention is that area and other areas of the country, part of the vulnerability of the country is also climatic. So climate change has increased the vulnerability of the country. We have had in 2019 the Idai, and then we had the Kenneth right after, which is across the same area where the war is in the northern part of the country is going on. And ever since then, we have had several, including the longest cyclone / tropic storm that started in Australia, came to Mozambique, went back to Madagascar, came back to Mozambique, went back to Madagascar, wouldn't let go. So in the wake of it all, there has been this increase of humanitarian needs. There has been this increase of displacement, and the face of it all is usually women and children. And they are exposed, as Mariana said, to having to offer sexual services in exchange for food, in exchange for shelter, and just by existing, because people think that the women's bodies are at their disposition. Feminists have been quite active. They have been active in all these scenes, Cabo Delgado, but also in another area where there have been resettlements. So these were organized resettlements due to the extractive industry in other areas of the country, particularly that province, and issues regarding how women are impacted by these displacements, whether voluntary, involuntary, more violent, more organized. There are always issues, and feminists have been working on this and calling to the attention, because Mozambique is still very much rural. About 70% of the population is rural. Women are a major force, agricultural force, and dispossession of land creates a strong impact on women, not just the sexual vulnerability, but also lack of access to any resources, to water, to food, the ability to provide, because yes, women are the food providers, not men, for their families, creates increased problems for women. And so feminists have been very good at this. At the same time, there has been an increase of autocratization of the country, and the civil society space has been shrinking. And feminists have been at the forefront of calling this up, on making sure that there are platforms in which this doesn't happen, on crying out on legislation that would make civil society more vulnerable, and sometimes flagging out when overall rights are shrinking, because they know all too well that if general rights shrink, their rights go first. Theirs and other vulnerable groups who are under their umbrella because they don't have the right to have their organization. So feminists are also the caretakers of other more vulnerable groups like the LGBT groups. Unfortunately, although we do have amazing young feminist groups flaring up, and these are activist groups, the more senior that are not, they are conservative in terms of feminist thinking sometimes, and how feminist thinking is, but not necessarily exclusionary of the different groups. So in that sense, they are quite good, but they are the ones who were university professors. They are the ones who were creating conceptual thoughts about all these issues like security, human security, and what are the important aspects to think about. They have become old, and they haven't been able to create an equally forceful feminist group that thinks conceptually. So we have a vibrant activist movement, but due to funding needs, they will follow agendas. They are their agendas, of course, but if you don't have the means and the funds to follow certain agendas that might be prioritary, you will go towards what there is money for. And so if donors don't align themselves and don't have a good dialogue with these very vibrant movements, I am afraid that their vision, and they have amazing visions. For example, they are quite critical of the way the donors approach, for example, underage unions. They say they understand, and yes, it's a problem, but not the way donors are saying it is. If they don't have the funds to research to gather evidence to then give the donors tools for how to cater for what is the reality on the ground, women will continue to face insecurities. They are now focused a lot on violence against women and gender-based violence. They have been disappearing. There is a lot of problems with trafficking. There is problem there are problems with just overall domestic violence. And this is fine, but it's because there's money for violence. There is very little money for other things that could be just as.
On that note, I have to close. We need
I'm done.
Yeah, we need to have some time for questions. I have to practice my throwing skills. Anyone? Yeah. Oh no, that's very far. And the West is gonna get it in its head probably.
Thank you. Thank you for this very, very interesting panel. And today is the last day of the exchanges. So putting together everything that's been said so far. Carmelise, I wanted to pick up on what you said about how the deprivation of land rights for women has essentially makes them so vulnerable with respect to access to all of the other rights we've also been discussing. And so I just wanted to put this question to the panel, but also for all of us to think about is that, of course, we are working on, you know, in many ways, Marx's critique of rights, of liberal rights in his essay on the Jewish question was really about the fact that we are sort of dividing the essence of human beings into these various rights and these, categories. And in that way, also creating an abstract sphere of citizenship, which is different from the natural sphere within which human beings are operating. And in doing so, we are creating these silos in a way and creating these rights which ultimately are still operating within that sphere of inequality. And to that extent, I just wanted, and Sam Moen and others have pushed back on the human rights movement with that critique that they've not been able to do anything for really reducing global inequality. And so, putting all of that together, what is our reimagination, or how do we take back what the work that all of us have been doing for the past 2 decades and, respond to those critiques and also sort of think about how to harmonize, because we saw that with the COVID crisis as well, that, everyone in India, for example, went back to the villages, to the land, to their sense of home, to the sense of belonging, once they were thrown out of jobs in the cities. So how do we, considering a large part of the world is still dependent upon land for their livelihood, how do we bring all of these things together?
No more hands? Okay, I'm gonna try.
All right, so my question is fused with a comment and reflection. So in the Afghan case, I wonder if conceptually, as an academic and in the academic community, if you thought about how to influence society. So the invasion is one thing, and that brings along its own structural changes. But these things come back, as we've seen now. And I wonder if there is a way from the academy to say, how do we influence society so that they can change? And I think one of the ways in Sudan is to sit around a cup for coffee. And that has come at a later stage. And bringing it back to the influence of society is, I spent a lot more time with women than I did with men growing up. And that's just how, at least in Zimbabwe, society is set up. I saw my father maybe for an hour, 2 hours. If you came back from work, if you had dinner, and you went to bed, and that's 2 hours. So Monday to Friday, you've literally seen him less than 10 hours. But you have a maid, or at least in Zimbabwe, and you have your mother, and you spend a lot more time. And they raised us up as pretty much spoiled brats, right? And my sister, on the other hand, started cooking when she was, 10 maybe. But I didn't learn to cook until I went to university. And so I wonder, in this feminist movement, how we can start to raise better men. Because I feel we are also leaving them behind in this feminist drive. And then we are surprised if, you know, they, in Haiti, in the Haitian case, they continue to exploit and think because of entitlement that women's bodies belong to them. And so, yeah, question fused with reflections and all of that.
Oh, I have to give the word to Marianne before she has to run.
Okay. I'm no expert in land. Yeah, I am not very steady in land rights, so I'm not going to comment too much on that. But I was thinking a bit about Wesley's last comment there, and it's in Haiti they have a saying, and they say all the time, women are important, and they say they are the pillars of society. And I hate that expression because it only means that they have to work much harder and do everything in addition to these feminist causes, because they have to do everything inside the house. They have to raise the boys as spoiled brats. So I think, yeah, another way of thinking around that. Yeah, I don't have any answer. It was just a comment. I think it's not the best expression. It just keeps them, you know, stuck, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna answer really briefly to the question of how to influence society to raise better men. Are we limiting the social role of women only to the reproductive role and the care responsibility? This is a problem. It should be a shared responsibility of all society components. Men should do that. Okay, I will stop. But we will continue the discussion.
Yeah, thank you for very good questions. And as the other panelists, I don't think I can answer them in full. So I wanted to address Namita's question about are we siloing rights and are we not paying attention, enough attention to material rights? I would say like 5 years ago that was actually a very valid, I think, input towards Afghan women's movement, that there had been a tendency reinforced by donors to focus on certain rights and not female material dependence on family members, male family members. And as a result, it was kind of this protection approach to women's rights. And I think what's very interesting is that kind of dovetails very nicely with this very much focus on violence that Carmelisa and I think also Marianne mentioned, that kind of this prioritization of violence as one question of women's issues is it fits very well with donor dynamics. It's you know, it's all about producing laws and protecting women without really challenging or questioning the broader relations that they're part of. And it can also be, as I think in the US has shown, you know, it has problems because it tends to be very classed, has very stark class implications, so that poor men are persecuted and put in jail more than the men of other backgrounds. So yes, it is a valid critique, but I think at the moment now in Afghanistan, with the extreme repression that we're seeing, you know, it's hard to say that more of a focus on women's material rights can necessarily bring results. I think now it does make sense to have that kind of focus on women's civil and political rights, but perhaps I'm wrong.
I don't have any comments. I will start where Dolan left off. I think that we can think about this rights issue the same way feminism has developed. We can be critical and try to improve on it. Rights are still very relevant. I mean, the difference is that it has made, for example, the introduction of more liberal family laws in different countries. They are palpable. So we cannot deny the usefulness of laws and rights, and the discussion of what are our shared common human aspirations, let us call them, more than rights, right? So while we are critical, and it's important to be critical, the same way in feminism, we have been critical of ourselves and where we were
going, and who did we leave behind, and whose experiences we didn't account for. And what we need to do is to complement and improve on this. I think the international organizations are always going to be very positivistic, but us working on the conceptual front, we can use these positivistic tools and improve on them. I think this would be the way. In terms of better men, absolutely. But I agree, it's a shared responsibility. In Mozambique, we have an organization. It's an NGO. It's paid by the international donors organization. It's called HOPEM, which sounds nice in English. Hope, men, hope. and they are responsible for educating other men, educating them to cook, to share in the domestic front. And what I'm very hopeful is in the social area, there are men discussing what it means to be a man. You know, are you still a man if you share your responsibilities at home, if you raise your kids, if you spend time with your children, you know, instead of just 2 hours, but you know, and there are proud men showcasing how good parents they are and how they participate in every single aspects of the lives, while young women are enjoying their lives as free with their friends, with their female friends, and having free time for themselves. So there are changes there, and we are currently doing a project in poorer areas and trying to figure out how people understand equality, gender equality. And there is a difference between practice and narratives, of course, but people are slowly being ashamed of certain narratives. And once we introduce a change in narrative, you know, change in practice will follow. Not for all, but for some.
I thought I was doing cups, but Siri is doing the cups. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.